Black Lives Matter call to action hashtag started in 2014 after the death and killing of Michael Brown. However, it became an international movement in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. It was started by three women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. I'm Sarah Bernard, and today on The Issues, we'll focus on why Black Lives Matter, which seems to create controversy because so many people don't fully understand its significance. We have a diverse panel today that will help shed some light on this issue as well as some resolutions. That's all coming up on this episode of The Issues. Stay tuned. Thanks for staying with us. Today's panel will consist of two professionals who will discuss some of the issues as to why Black Lives Matter. But first, let's take a look at this video.
Why is the message so clear when you hear white lives matter, or blue lives matter, or even all lives matter? Of course, all lives matter because each are a part of this world. However, when you hear Black Lives Matter, some may cringe or think of a race war when all it simply means is equality. Why would the color of a person's skin determine how they're to be treated? When other than the color of the skin, all people are the same. Every human being bleeds the same color blood, red. Some may say Black culture has been mimicked by many other cultures for years, from skin tanning to music and dance to procedures for enlarged lips and derrieres, which was once considered a defect on Blacks. Why try to understand their rhythm, but not their blues? Until there's communication and understanding, some may never understand why Black Lives Matter.
Welcome back. We don't want to waste any time, so let's jump right into this issue of why Black Lives Matter. First, we have Mrs. Rawls, who is a community member, a longtime resident of St. Louis, and here to join us on this very important topic. And we also have Mr. Kevin Prang, who is also a community member, longtime resident of St. Louis and lives in the city as well. And they're both here to join us today to share their thoughts on this issue. So Kevin, let's start with you. And if you could just give us some light on why you think it's so hard for many people to understand why Black Lives Matter.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for inviting me to participate today. I appreciate that. And I guess the first thing I want to say is, I'm not an expert. I'm just a citizen, and I'm also someone who's working to do better on all these issues. And I'm going to make mistakes, and I think that might be the first thing that we have to acknowledge for ourselves, is give ourselves that space to say we're not perfect on this. I think people get too hung up on whether they are guilty or not guilty when we are stepping into a system that exists, and we have to work our way through it. And I see myself as someone who is trying to progress along those lines. And I think when we say many people, we need to be honest about that also and say it's about white people not accepting the phrase Black Lives Matter. I don't think there are many African Americans who don't understand this concept of Black Lives Matter. And I think when white people hear that phrase, they hear it as a competitive phrase, that the first response is, don't white lives matter? Don't all lives matter? Or why should Black people get, special treatment? And that comes, I think, from starting within a system that benefits white citizens more than any other citizens in the country, in the city, in the state. And so when someone raises their voice and says, hey, there's a problem here, those of us that have benefited from that system that is in place think to ourselves, well, I don't see a problem. And there's where a disconnect happens. And that's where I think some of the starting place is.
That's very good. Thank you so much, Kevin. Roz, why don't we jump in there? Let's hear from you. And is there anything about what Kevin just said that rings true for you as well?
Sarah, thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be here. And I agree with Kevin on many of the things that he just said. There is a strong disconnect. And I do think it goes back to, like he said, also from the federal state to the city, is widespread. But the disconnect is when we're dealing with a system that's not for all people. We have a broken system. So therefore, it makes it hard for white people to understand what we really mean by Black Lives Matter. It is a thing that all lives matter. And I think when we see our protesters out saying Black Lives Matter, and we see paraphernalia saying Black Lives Matter, it's not to just think that the fact that all lives matter. We do believe all lives matter, but inequality exists. And so this is why we have to look at it from a different set of lens. All lives matter, but when Black lives are not treated equally, then we have an issue. That's where the disconnect comes in. And if people don't understand the history of our country, it has thrown us totally off. Where white people don't understand, not all white people, there are several white people, they don't know the history of how this country came to an existence. And so for Black lives to be destroyed the way they're being destroyed exponentially, it's an issue here. And the disconnect is when white people ignore the fact that we see so many Black lives being destroyed from police brutality, and no justice is being served in return. The police are getting away with it. We need to be educated, and so this is where this disconnect is, because as long as white people are treated fairly, like they should be, they don't see a broken system. But Black people who are experiencing it and families who are experiencing it with their loved ones, we see it. And this is where we have a strong disconnect.
So the question seems to be coming up, or I keep hearing you all talk about equality. And what does equality look like? If we truly had equality, would this issue of why Black Lives Matter even exist as an issue? Roz, what are your thoughts on that?
So if we had equality in our country, things would change dramatically, because everybody would be treated equally and the same, no matter what it is, when it comes to the justice system, when it comes to education, when it comes to our homes, our communities, our jobs, promotion, finances, everything. Then that's really all Black people are asking for, is equality, because things would change. But right now, what we're finding and seeing is inequality on an utmost horizon. It's just unbelievable. It's blatant today how much inequality is everywhere.
And do you feel, and Kevin, let me direct this to you. As a white male, do you ever feel inequality in your life?
Actually, not much, and that's the thing that's important to remember. Now, granted, I'm middle class. I come with economic privilege as well as racial societal privilege. I had the opportunity to work in the St. Louis Public School District from 2000 to 2005, and that was an environment where I was not in the majority. But at the same time, I never felt like I didn't belong. And one of the reasons is because of the good people that work in the St. Louis Public School District. But also, I think it's also important to remember that even in that situation, when I step home from that situation, the rest of society is still focused on me as a white male. So that I am never far away from feeling comfortable, even if I'm the only white male in the room. There's still this pervasive situation where whiteness, maleness, and I even joke about this, I'm right-handed, so I tick all the boxes, is the normal status. And everything is judged against that. So to be honest with you, no, I do not feel that, and not even close to the level that people of color, both Black and brown, gay and lesbian, bi, transgender, feel in amongst what is considered normal within our society. And if I feel discomfort, it is that discomfort. It really is not that prejudice that keeps me from accessing services, from accessing a paycheck, from accessing the vote. So it is a very, very different story for me.
That's very interesting. Roz, what I just heard Kevin say is that the white male is the baseline.
Yes, it's been it for years.
Um,
And
how does that resonate with you?
that's where we also deal with inequality. And he's absolutely right. And the one thing I have to commend Kevin for is at least he acknowledges, he owns it. And this is where we have to get in this country, our states, our cities, people to start owning what's really happening. We have too many hidden biases and they're just being pushed under the rug and ignored. But yet, what is it? I think is for every dollar that's made, a male makes 37 cents more on a dollar than the females. And then who knows how much more when it comes to the Black female or an Asian female. It's the inequality is there. And it's almost, we can be the same education, if not, that Blacks could have an even higher education. And yet they still will not be treated equally and receive the same equal pay. And it's all those stipulations we have to get past with equality. And it's just unfair for people have to go out their ways to do everything they need to do for color, and yet they don't receive the same opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Roz, in your life as a Black woman, have you always felt that this was an issue, or was there a time ever where you didn't even notice that there was a difference in our society?
You know, the only time I probably didn't notice where it was a strong issue was probably when I was in junior high school and probably high school. But it was when I actually started working in the corporate office in the real world. And I worked at the corporate office that I worked at for 46 years, 2 months shy, 46. And I can absolutely say, yes, I was able to see systemic racism, white privilege, total discrimination. Yeah, I loved all my jobs I had, but my biggest dispute was dealing with inequality, racism, white privilege, systemic racism. I watched people who were uneducated get promoted way above African Americans who were highly educated. And you talk about something that's hard to keep dealing with and just watch them do it blatantly. That's a hard way to process.
So you feel that despite your education, your intelligence, and I understand you have a couple of master's degrees.
Yes.
You were overlooked because of the color of your skin for promotions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My last job that I totally enjoyed, I watched so many people who were not qualified, steady being promoted. And those of us who were highly qualified, experienced, only educated, be ignored, and then give us these lame lies as to why these people were being promoted. It is pathetic. But I tell you what I did, acknowledge it to the people before I got ready to retire. Now, will anything be done about it? Who knows how long it'll take, but I had to let my voice be heard. This is where we have to get today. It's time for our voices to be heard and some action to take.
So the movement of why Black Lives Matter, it's, you know, a lot of times we hear about it as it pertains to, as you mentioned earlier in this interview, police brutality, killing of young Black men, that kind of thing. You're describing a situation that is very, very different. You're in a corporate workplace with a high education, multiple degrees, and you're overlooked. Are we focused on the right things when we talk about why Black Lives Matter, do you feel that the focus is truly on all Black lives, or are we thinking of it in more of a pigeonhole situation?
I don't think it's a pigeonhole by any means. It's all areas for Black lives. And this is why we're saying it wasn't just Michael Brown's case that did it. It wasn't just George Floyd that did it. It's so many. It's in high volumes of numbers where it's just increasing and increasing and nothing is being done about it. It's not just with police brutality. It's with our education system. It's with our homes, our communities. It's with our jobs. It's with promotions. It's everywhere. It's credit. We're being ignored, but like we don't exist.
Right.
That's it. And that's why we're saying Black Lives Matter. Give us equality. And yes, it'll make a huge difference.
Kevin, what's your take on that? When you hear Black Lives Matter, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about the Rozes of the world in the corporate workplace, or are you thinking about the Michael Browns in the street who are being pulled over perhaps for no particular reason? Where does your head go with that?
I don't think we can separate the two. Roz, you can probably speak to this better than I can, but that degree doesn't mean a thing when it comes to being pulled over, because the police officer can't see your master's degree in your windshield. And even if he did, that may not make a difference. So, Breonna Taylor was an EMT who was asleep in her bed. So it is not a matter of separating, folks on the street from folks in the boardroom. So I'm a little uncomfortable with that question. But when you say, who do I think about? I think about people that I interact with, and I keep that personal. I don't know Roz, but I do know my friends, who I think about what would happen if something like this happened to someone that is close to me and I care about. So I think about my friends who are in that situation. I've been in the car with a friend who was pulled over because he was driving while Black. And it took me a while to register that was what was happening. To me, it was just another, we got pulled over, whatever. I did not realize the tension that was in his body at that time. So I try to keep it personal and think about people I know, because that my heart is connected then instead of an abstract. But I also don't think that we can separate the professional from non-professional when we're talking about this question.
Kevin, I love that you said that question made you uncomfortable, because I think if this were a comfortable topic, we wouldn't ever be able to make a difference or see a difference and see resolution. So on that note, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some solutions to help us really address this issue of why Black Lives Matter in our families, in our schools, and in our workplace. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with more. Welcome back. In case you're just joining us, today's topic on the issues is why Black Lives Matter. Our panelists have just shared some issues on why Black Lives Matter in their lives. And now we'd like to share some ideas for resolution. And this is not a topic that we're going to resolve in 10 minutes, but it is important to talk amongst ourselves, amongst our families and friends about this issue of why Black Lives Matter, why it's important, and what can we do to get past it and get into some state, Roz, as you said earlier, of equality, of everyone feeling equal in this world, and everyone has that absolute right. So where do we start, even with children? What's, we've all seen at these demonstrations and the parades and this and that, children who are going out in the streets with their parents to protest, to be a part of the conversation. Is that, what do you all think about that? Is that something that our kids, are they really learning from that? Is that important? And what's the conversation we should be having with them? Roz, let's start with you.
Well, I think the importance of that is that we're getting our kids involved and teaching them some form of history. And 9 times out of 10, those kids who are actually participating in the protests, the marches, they are probably receiving education about Black history at some point, so they can understand what they're doing, why they are doing it. And the most important thing to me when it comes to our kids is we need to start teaching them from babies up, because when babies come into the world, they're innocent. They have no biases. They have no prejudice. They come in as innocent souls, and they look at other children, and they can walk and touch and play with other children if they're exposed to all different skin colors, and they have no biases. They can play with them and hug them and love them genuinely until taught the prejudice. And so we can get past that and teach kids how to love one another, and teach kids how they're not superior to either or, that they're equal. So when we can start off with children, because they're the future of the world, and if we can break the hidden biases by teaching our children, that's going to be a huge start, just because their minds aren't warped when they, and we just have to learn to expose them and teach them how to love one another, and let them know that they're, like, when we deal with white children, white parents have to let their white children know they're not better than Black children or Hispanics or Asians or Indians. We have to make sure we instill that, so they grow up, they know that. So we have to start with children with educating them properly with love.
That's a really good point. I love how you pointed out that we are born without biases, and those we create our own, right? We're taught that somewhere along the line. Kevin, if you look back at your own childhood, do you feel, were there ways in which your parents instilled in you maybe a lack of bias, or perhaps biases? Do you recall any examples?
That's another heavy question, Sarah. Thank you for that. I think that's something that's evolved over time. I was born in the late 60s, and, just a couple of months after Dr. King was assassinated. And my parents being my parents being young parents at the time, I think were navigating history as well as I was. And their understanding has evolved over time as well as mine. But I also need to be honest in that, especially older generations in my family, racism is prevalent and was prevalent. So it has been a conscious effort. I don't think I ever had a conversation to me about the way Roz has stated it. But there were those threads of people need to be treated the same, and those threads then can be expanded into something else as we grow into things. So I think that's the interesting thing, is I don't even think my parents knew precisely how to address the issue when I was a child. So we were all kind of learning together. And I think that's a difference between white and Black families in our society. Roz, you and your family probably have very different discussions than we had growing up. We never had to have that discussion about what to do when pulled over or how to handle a situation. We're sort of learning things in retrospect. A lot of the understanding I've come to has been in my adult life, where Roz, you probably had a lot of these things that you were taught earlier in your life. And so it is not an equal delivery of information. And I think as each generation passes, hopefully we're getting a little bit better at that. Although as we see from a lot of people online and at rallies, that's not necessarily the case. But I think it does take an intentionality, like Roz has said. So,
Roz, is the goal in your mind that we acknowledge the differences between us, or that we don't see the differences between us and we see us all as the same? And there might be two answers to that question, but do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so, Sarah. First thing, I do think the goal is to acknowledge there is a difference. That's taking ownership and accountability. And until we can get to that point, we will never get on first base. So that is the first goal, is that we have to acknowledge it. We have to own that there is a difference. But right now it's hidden. They keep trying to cover it up like there's no difference. And it's like playing on our intelligence, okay? And many of us, we have a little bit of literacy. We can see things. So we would appreciate it if people stop doing that. And that's what aggravates people to the utmost, when you try to cover it like it doesn't exist. Own it, acknowledge it, take accountability, and then start doing something. But what has to happen? Education has to kick. Okay, we have to be educated. And this is where we're striving to go today, but yet we're getting pushback because a lot of white people are stating they don't want Black history taught in the schools. They don't want slavery taught in the schools. And again, we go back to our kids. We have to educate our kids. That's the only way we're going to change this world. That's the only way we're going to change the United States, the cities, our communities. Until once everybody gets educated, they need to, it shouldn't be that they're only taught a certain amount of history, and that's white history. Because what happens is we're being taught lies. And until we can be taught the truth, and everybody can be taught the truth, we will never get ahead. Black history is imperative for everyone to know in this country and throughout the world. And it has to be taught the same way throughout the country. It can't be changed here and changed there, because then it will never be the truth. The truth has to be taught so everybody can make a change. It's like, if the truth has to be taught about the human race, we have the systemic racism started, it was designed by law for division. We talk about all these different races that we have, when I have to put it like Pastor Creflo Dollar said, let's get away from that. We start with equality, and then we start with the truth about races. There's one race, one, and that's the human race. We have been divided by a white race, Black race, Hispanic, Asian, Indian. When all that is, we're different colors. We have different skin colors. But at the end of the day, we all bleed the same type of blood, which makes us all the human race. If we can just start teaching and get to the point, it's one race, and stop dividing us with all these different races, because that was divine. That was designed purposely to put white races on the top. If you notice, that's where that white supremacy comes from, white privilege comes from. But let's get rid of that. We're the human race. And if we think about it, and think about if we buy a truck, if we buy a car, trucks, you can get in all different colors. But at the end of the day, a truck is a truck no matter what color it is. You take a horse, you can get a horse in all different colors. But at the end of the day, when you look at the horses, no matter what color they are, they're a horse. That's what we are as people. We're one race, one, not a white, Black, Hispanic, Indian, and this Asian. It's not that. We're all different skin colors, but we're one race. And that's why education is so important. Because the country, United States, was built off of the Blacks, but off the backs of our ancestors, Black people. And people need to know that. So we have too many white people who are not educated with this. They are clueless as to how this country came into existence. They are clueless as to how our Black people were dragged over to the United States and destroyed by their language, separated from their families, beaten, whipped, destroyed, lynched. They don't know this. And it's time for people to learn the truth and then see why we feel the way we feel. It's time for the truth to be set free.
So do you think, so Juneteenth, June 19th, which is a celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation when slaves were freed, and in Texas in 1865, when on that date, when they were freed in Texas, do you believe and feel that it should be a federal holiday, and would we benefit from that in terms of that history lesson?
I think exonerating June 16th as a national holiday is great. It's the first step, but it is so far from getting us to equality. It's because what will happen in turn if we don't get our laws changed throughout the United States, throughout our states, if we don't get those changed, we're still dealing with the same old, okay? Yeah. Even having this as a holiday, only people who will benefit from that holiday is white people. They will make money. They will create all types of paraphernalia, whatever, to make money off of that. When yet, in turn, nothing will happen for our race. We have Martin Luther King as a holiday.
Yeah,
we don't benefit from it. Nothing has changed. The lives for Black people have only gotten worse. So just making it a holiday is not that much for me to say we're near equality.
Kevin, we've got 30 seconds left. What are your thoughts on that as a federal holiday?
For Juneteenth, I think that this is a good example of where white people need to listen. Roz, you expressed both things that I've heard since it was signed into law, and it is both a chance to celebrate and lift up a history that has been hidden, but also is not nearly enough. And both things are true at the same time. And I think this is a good opportunity. This is a good example of listen to both things, that both the celebration and then also the desire for more equality.
Yeah, okay, very good. So, both of you, we've talked about a range of topics. Obviously, we could have a few more hours and probably not and still have things to talk about. It's a big discussion. Why Black Lives Matter. You both have made really great points and come at it from very different points of view and but also similar points of view. I think you're both actually very similar in where you're coming from, but come from different backgrounds. So appreciate everything that you've had to say. We've had a few ideas on resolution, starting with education and children and biases in the home. So lots of really good stuff here to continue that conversation outside of this program. So thank you both very much. I'd like to thank each and every one of you in our community who tune into the issues. And I want to remind everyone that you can also join the discussion. Be sure to check us out online on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And don't forget to download the free STL TV app. All right, so next time we're going to get into something a little bit different, but jumping off of what Roz has talked about, we're going to talk about history and how that's taught in our schools, and should we be looking at that differently. So that's up next on the issue, so stay tuned. We'll see you next time, and keep it right here at STL TV and Experience St. Louis.